My name is Maya Carter. I'm 31 years old, and my entire life savings vanished while I was standing in my uncle's lakehouse kitchen holding a mug of burnt coffee that suddenly tasted like metal. One second, my banking app showed 5 years of work. The next, it was just a row of zeros. Across the table, my brother-in-law Derek leaned back, grinned, and said, "We needed it more than you." Everyone went silent. Riley wouldn't meet my eyes. But what they didn't know was, that wasn't the first betrayal. It was just the loudest. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family, because trust me, you're not alone. What happened in that lake house didn't start with a hacked laptop or an empty bank account. It started years before, in moments I thought I'd forgotten. Let me take you back. I grew up in Denver in a small one-story house that always smelled like sawdust and burnt coffee. My parents owned a hardware shop attached to the side of the house, the kind with dusty aisles and old country music humming from a radio no one ever turned off. I spent most of my childhood there, sorting screws into plastic bins, wiping down countertops, counting change with my dad until the metal left a gray tint on my fingertips. Riley, my younger sister, was never around long enough to get her hands dirty. She'd float in wearing glitter lip gloss and a new excuse, toss her backpack on the floor, and laugh her way into whatever trouble she'd bring home next. Everyone said she was free-spirited. What they meant was, she never faced consequences. Not with my parents, not with anyone. I didn't resent her, not then. But I did learn early that in our family, love wasn't divided equally. It pooled around the person who asked for it the loudest. One night when I was 14, we were sitting at the dinner table, the overhead light buzzing like it might burn out any second. Mom dished mashed potatoes onto Riley's plate first, then Dad passed the chicken down the line without even noticing he'd skipped me. It wasn't mean, it was habit. Riley talked endlessly about a boy she liked, her bracelets clinking when she moved her hands. I kept waiting for someone to ask how my math competition had gone, because I'd won first place. The ribbon was still folded inside my hoodie pocket, warm against my palm. But the moment never came. I swallowed the silence. It tasted like dust. I didn't know it then, but this would matter later. After dinner, when Riley snuck out to meet her friends, I hid the sound of the door for her. I told my parents I'd seen her go upstairs. Mom had sighed with relief. Dad had smiled like I'd done something noble. It carved something small and sharp inside me, something I pushed down for years. As we got older, the patterns stayed the same. I started working part-time at the hardware shop after school. Riley worked too for exactly 1 weekend before deciding she was too stressed. My parents didn't push her. Instead, Dad told me how proud he was that I handled responsibility so well. He never said the other half out loud, but I felt it hanging in the air because someone has to. At 17, when I got my first paycheck from a summer job at a diner, I surprised Riley with a birthday cake and $50 tucked inside a card. She hugged me, shrieking like I'd given her a car. A week later, she spent the money on a last-minute concert ticket. I didn't expect her to save it, but she didn't even remember to thank me again. I laughed it off at the time. I didn't know it then, but that would matter too. Our teenage years blurred together: snowy Denver winters, cheap Christmas lights, the smell of cinnamon cocoa. Mom always made too sweet. I remember one Christmas clearly. I unwrapped a pair of clearance boots from the hardware store surplus. Riley unwrapped a brand new iPod. Dad said something about needing to spoil the baby of the family while she's still young. I smiled and said I didn't mind, but it carved another line, thin and quiet like the first crack in a foundation. Years later, when I said the boutique was my dream, Mom pulled out a box of her old fabric scraps. "You and your big plans." She laughed gently, touching my cheek. Riley glanced over the sewing table and said, "Can't you just get a normal job?" Dad told her to hush, but not before the words hit me. I swallowed them too. But all of it, the favoritism, the swallowed disappointments, the tiny wounds I never cleaned out, they weren't the real turning point. That came the night the police knocked on our front door. And that was when everything broke. It was a Thursday night in late October, the kind where the cold sneaks under doors and settles into your bones. I was in my room half asleep over a stack of sketches for the boutique I kept promising myself I'd open someday when the doorbell rang. Not a soft chime, but a hard, urgent pounding that rattled the frame. I remember the way my stomach dropped before I even reached the living room. Mom froze with a dish towel in her hand. Dad wiped his palms on his jeans like he already knew. When he opened the door, 2 officers stood under the yellow porch light, hats in their hands, snow flurries catching in the air around them. I'll never forget the look on their faces, gentle, apologetic, rehearsed from delivering the same nightmare to countless homes before ours. "Are you the Carters?" one asked. Dad nodded. Mom's hand found my shoulder. I felt her nails dig in. "There's been an accident," the officer said. "I'm very sorry." The rest blurred the words drunk driver intersection instant, slamming into us faster than my brain could register. Mom collapsed first. Riley started shaking so violently I thought she'd faint. I stood completely still, like my body had been unplugged. When grief hits fast enough, it doesn't feel like falling. It feels like freezing. The days after were a gray smear of casseroles left on our porch, whispered condolences and paperwork. Endless, suffocating paperwork. Uncle Tom stepped in because someone had to. He drove us to the funeral home, sat through meetings with insurance people, helped sort the legal mess. He was the one who asked me gently if I wanted to see the car. I said no. He nodded, like he already knew that was the only answer I had. When we met with the lawyer to read the will, Riley kept her head down. Her fingers twisted the hem of her sweater like she was trying to tear it apart. The office smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. Sunlight cut across the table in a sharp rectangle. I remember thinking it looked like a spotlight and we were all trapped inside it. The estate was modest, the house, the hardware shop, a small savings account. But the lawyer opened a second folder that held 2 handwritten notes, one for each of us. Mom had written them herself. Mine said, "For Maya, use this to build something that belongs to you." Riley said, "For Riley, choose a life that makes you happy." I clutched that note like a lifeline. Riley cried reading hers. But even then, even in grief, there was a subtle shift I didn't fully understand. Riley kept glancing at me like she expected me to fix everything. And I did try so hard it nearly buried me later. In the months after I used my portion to finally begin the boutique project, it started small, a lease on a tiny storefront, a few racks of clothing, I hand-curated shelves of candles and local crafts. Chloe came into my life then, stumbling in one afternoon with a resume and an enthusiasm that made the place feel alive. She became the kind of friend I didn't know I needed. Riley, meanwhile, drifted. She dropped classes, changed jobs twice, and started dating a guy who owned more leather jackets than brain cells. Then, one afternoon, she showed up at my shop with a stranger. Derek Cole. He had that slick, easy confidence some men wear like a second skin. He shook my hand too firmly, smiled like he could see right through me, and called my boutique cute. He meant it as an insult wrapped in a compliment, and I felt it. At first, he treated Riley like she was something he'd been waiting for his whole life. He brought her flowers, remembered her coffee order, laughed at her jokes even when they weren't funny. But small cracks showed early. He'd check her phone when she left the room. He'd make comments like, "You're lucky your sister's the responsible one," or, "Good thing Maya keeps money straight, right?" He'd borrow $50 and return 40 with a shrug. But Riley loved him, and when she loved someone, she committed blindly. The wedding was small backyard string lights, Uncle Tom grilling burgers because Derek didn't want to waste money on catering. Riley looked happy, so I convinced myself that was all that mattered. Tom pulled me aside, once, eyes serious. "Something about him doesn't add up," he said. I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. In the year after the wedding, Riley changed. She grew quieter, softer. Her laughter, once loud and wild, now flickered like a flame in a drafty room. She canceled lunches with me. She stopped showing up unannounced. She stopped talking about her dreams. And then came the day she told me Derek had helped her with the paperwork from our parents' estate. She said it casually, sipping a melted iced coffee, eyes darting away. I felt a strange chill, like someone had cracked a window in mid-January. When I asked what paperwork, she shrugged and said she didn't remember. Something tightened in my chest. I didn't push, not then. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment Derek stepped directly into the heart of our family. Years passed like that, me working, building the boutique, saving every penny. Riley disappearing into her marriage, Derek always circling the edges with a smirk. All of it led to the lakehouse weekend. All of it was a fuse, burning slowly, quietly toward an explosion I didn't see coming until it was too late. I didn't know it then, but the fire had already started. When Uncle Tom invited everyone to the lake house for a long fall weekend, I told myself it would be good for us. A reset. A chance to breathe in the crisp Colorado air, watch the leaves turn gold, and maybe feel like a family again. I packed sweaters, my sketchbook, and the hope that things between Riley and me weren't as broken as they felt. The lake house sat at the edge of a narrow dock half hidden behind tall pines. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the air was sharp enough to sting my lungs. I saw Jenna first. She was standing on the porch with a mug of tea, her ponytail swaying in the wind. When I stepped out of my car, she hugged me tight, but when she leaned close, her voice dropped to a whisper. Just be prepared this weekend. For what I whispered back. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence said enough to make my stomach knot. Inside the lake house felt familiar and foreign at the same time. The old wood floors creaked under my boots. The air smelled like pine and something warm, maybe chili, cooking in the crock pot. Aunt Linda lit candles everywhere, insisting it made the space feel cozy. Derek's laugh cut through the room before I even saw him. Loud, overconfident. That kind of laugh that fills space it doesn't belong in. He gave me a once-over and smirked. Maya, hey, still running that little shop of yours? Yeah, I said. Still running it. Cute. He winked like he'd said something charming instead of condescending. Riley stood behind him. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I'd only been in the house 10 minutes, but something felt off. The tension wasn't loud, it was quiet. Heavy. Like the pause between thunder and lightning. Like everyone was waiting for the wrong word to set off a chain reaction. That night, Jenna and I were in the guest room. I was staying in my room for the weekend, folding sweaters and talking about nothing important. When Aunt Linda called from the kitchen for help with dinner, Jenna dragged me out by the wrist, insisting Tom's chili tasted like wet cardboard and she refused to eat it without distractions. We laughed all the way down the stairs, but when I came back up 20 minutes later, something was wrong. My laptop sat on the desk, angled differently than how I'd left it. The charging cord was plugged into the left port, even though I always used the right, because the left one was loose. My notebook had been shifted 2 inches to the side. Not messy, just off. My chest tightened. I touched the trackpad. Warm. I opened the screen. The browser history was spotless, but not empty, cleaned. Wiped. Not a single trace of anything. I felt a prickle along the back of my neck. The same instinct you get when someone stands too close behind you in a dark hallway. I told myself I was overreacting. Jenna had probably bumped the desk. Someone could have mistaken my laptop for theirs. It was a house full of people. Small things happen. But the part of me that always paid attention, the part of me that had survived grief, family imbalance, Derek's smugness, it whispered something else. Something here is wrong. At dinner, Derek sat at the head of the table like he owned the place. He talked about business opportunities, about crypto, about a new investment circle he was about to get in on. He made everything sound like a secret club, only he was important enough to join. Riley laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. Her hand wrapped around her fork like she was afraid to put it down. Halfway through the meal, I reached for the serving spoon, and Riley flinched. A small sudden jerk of her arm. I didn't comment. But later, when I handed her a napkin, her sleeve slid back, and I saw a bruise on her wrist. Dark, fresh. What happened? I asked. She pulled her sleeve back down. I banged it on a cabinet. I gave her a long look. She blinked fast, too fast. I'm fine, Maya, please. Derek's eyes flicked toward us from across the table, watching, measuring. That night, I got the first call from Chloe. Hey, she said, voice tight. Vendor payment didn't go through. Card declined. That doesn't make sense, I said, stepping out onto the porch so no one would overhear. Cold air slapped my cheeks awake. Just try it again. I did. Twice. Same error. My fingers numbed. Okay, I'll look into it tomorrow. I hung up and stared out over the dark water. The moon shimmered across the lake in broken lines. Broken, just like every instinct inside me suddenly was. Later, when I came back inside to grab a glass of water, I heard a voice. Derek's. Low, sharp, almost hissed. I'll get it. Relax. It's just family money. They're too soft to fight back. I froze at the edge of the hall, heart hammering. Then his tone changed fast, too fast. Yeah, no, I'm just ordering food, babe. I stepped forward, and the porch light caught his face. He was smiling at his phone, but his shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched. When he noticed me, he lifted the phone. DoorDash, he said with a grin. Midnight cravings, you know. I nodded. But something inside me shifted again like sand under my feet. One wrong movement and I'd sink. The next morning, after 2 cups of burnt lakehouse coffee and a forced group breakfast, I went to approve a routine payment for the boutique. It declined. Again. I tried to breathe. I told myself it was a glitch. A tech issue. Anything but what my body already knew. I opened my banking app. And the world stopped. 5 years of savings evaporated into a flat, unforgiving line of zeros. The room tilted. Someone was talking Aunt Linda maybe, but the sound came from far away. My heartbeat roared like thunder in my ears, and for the first time in years I felt a crack deep inside me, shift, and I knew something catastrophic had already begun. For a long moment, all I could do was stare at the screen, waiting for the numbers to fix themselves, waiting for the app to admit it was a glitch, a joke, a nightmare I could pinch myself awake from. But the balance didn't change. The zeros stayed. Cold, flat, final. My throat tightened until breathing felt like swallowing glass. I walked into the kitchen like I was moving underwater. Everyone was scattered around the long wooden table, Tom pouring coffee, Aunt Linda cracking eggs, Jenna slicing fruit. Riley sat stiffly, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. Derek stood near the window pretending to inspect the trees like they mattered more than the people in the room. My money's gone, I said. Everything stopped. A fork clattered against a plate. Even the old fridge buzzing in the corner seemed to hush. Tom turned first. Gone? What do you mean gone? I held up my phone. My hand shook just enough to betray me. Transferred out overnight. All of it. Jenna moved toward me instantly. Aunt Linda touched her chest like she might faint. Riley's eyes went glassy, huge, terrified, and guilty. Derek leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You call the bank? He asked. His tone was too casual. Too easy, like he was asking whether I'd remembered to lock my car. Yes. My voice felt hollow, like someone else was speaking through my mouth. They said someone logged in from a recognized device. Used my password, my security answers. The room thickened. Aunt Linda gasped softly. Tom straightened, jaw tightening. I looked directly at Derek. You were near my laptop yesterday. Were you in my room? Before he could answer, Riley snapped, voice trembling. Are you accusing my husband? Derek let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Maybe your little business partner messed up. Or maybe he shrugged. You don't know how money works. That's when the tiny ember of anger in my chest flared into something hotter. Show me your bank statements, then I said. If you're so financially stable. His smirk twitched. Just slightly. I don't know you proof. Interesting, because an innocent man would be loudest in defending himself. Riley's fingers trembled around her mug. She whispered barely audible Maya. But Derek cut her off with a glare sharp enough to slice. He pushed off the counter and stepped closer, smirk locked in place like armor. We needed it more than you, he said. Clear, cold, cruel. The words cracked through the room like a gunshot. Aunt Linda gasped. Jenna whispered, Oh, my God. Tom stood so fast his chair scraped the floor, but Riley didn't move. She just sat there, eyes wide like she'd been punched. Something inside me shifted, then not a break, not a collapse. Something cleaner. Colder. A click, like a lock sliding into place. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I felt nothing except the sharp clarity that hits right before a storm. I see, I said quietly. I grabbed my bag from the back of the chair. My hands were steady now. Too steady. Derek watched me with a grin that showed way too many teeth. What are you doing? He asked. I'm making a call. To who? The people who care about stolen money, I said. You won't mind what happens next. His smirk faltered just for a second, then he barked a laugh. You're not calling anyone. He took a step forward, but Tom moved faster, planting himself between us. Back off, Tom said, voice low, controlled. Derek sneered. She's being dramatic. The money's gone. Done? Buried. She'll never see it again. My heart thudded once, deep and solid. That was all I needed. I stepped around Tom and walked toward the front door. Riley stood abruptly. Derek, stop. Just please. He grabbed her wrist. Hard, hard enough that she winced. That's when something snapped in her too. "Derek, don't," she whispered, shaking. He didn't loosen his grip. I took a slow step forward. "Riley," I said gently. "What's going on?" She opened her mouth. Derek squeezed harder. "We're leaving," he snarled. "Pack your things. No one is going anywhere until I get answers," I said. He turned on me with a glare, but something new flickered behind it, fear. "Call the police," he taunted. "Tell them you lost your savings. Maybe they'll send someone next week." His arrogance smelled like gasoline in the room. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 6 months earlier, after a hacking attempt at the boutique, Chloe had insisted I install a security tool. One that photographed anyone accessing my files, logged keystrokes, tracked device IDs, stored everything in a hidden cloud folder. And Derek, idiotically confident, had sat in front of my laptop for several minutes last night. Long enough for the camera to capture him. Long enough for the software to record every key he pressed. I slipped my phone from my bag. Derek lunged. Tom blocked him again. Maya Jenna whispered, "Are you sure?" "I'm done being unsure." I dialed. The call barely rang once before the bank's fraud specialist answered. I spoke calmly, too calmly, words clicking into place like puzzle pieces. "Yes, I'm reporting an active, unauthorized transfer. Yes, the suspect is present and trying to leave the property." Derek froze. Then he laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "You're unbelievable." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not wrong." When I hung up, the house went utterly still. Riley stared at the ground, Derek's hand still clamped on her wrist, Tom towering protectively nearby. I looked at Derek, and he looked back, with the first edges of panic threading into his expression. He knew. Something was coming, and he couldn't stop it. When the knock finally came, it wasn't a knock at all. It was a violent, echoing bang that shook the lake house down to its beams. Everyone flinched. Aunt Linda gasped, clutching the countertop as if the wood might steady her. Riley jumped so hard her mug spilled across the table, coffee sliding in a dark streak toward her lap. Derek froze just long enough for me to see the fear flash across his face before he smothered it with indignation. Another bang. Police opened the door. Cold air rushed into the room as Tom strode across the floorboards and pulled the door open. For a moment, the sunlight behind the officers turned them into dark silhouettes, solid, immovable, undeniable. Then they stepped in boots, thudding heavy on the old wood. 3 uniformed officers, and behind them, Detective Sarah Harmon, tall, composed, slate-gray eyes, scanning the room in one slow, precise sweep. "Which one of you is Maya Carter?" she asked. I stepped forward. "That's me." The detective nodded once, flipping open a folder she held tucked under her arm. "Your bank's fraud team flagged multiple suspicious transfers from your accounts. These logins originated from a recognized device and a matching IP address traced to this location." Her words sliced through the room, carving silence in their wake. Derek stepped forward, hands raised like he was the victim here. "That's ridiculous. She clearly messed something up. We're having a family issue, that's all, mister." Cold Detective Harmon cut in. "Is there a reason your name appears on several intermediary transfers connected to the suspect accounts?" Every drop of color drained from Derek's face. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "People hack things all the time." "Interesting," she said calmly, because the login credentials used last night were manually entered, not copied. And they were entered from a laptop registered to Miss Carter. The room spun toward Derek. He licked his lips. Anyone could have used her laptop. "Good," I said softly. "Then you won't mind this." I pulled up my photos, the hidden folder, the security logs. Dozens of time-stamped frames of Derek hunched over my laptop in the dim light of the guest room. His face lit blue by the screen. His fingers tapping keys. His eyes narrowed in concentration. One shot even caught him biting his lip, frustrated when the software prompted a security question only family would know. Detective Harmon took the phone, her expression unchanging as she scrolled. "It's very thorough," she murmured. "Keystroke logs included." Derek lunged, not at the detective, at me. "Give me that." 2 officers grabbed him before he even got close. "Step back," Sir One barked, wrenching his arms behind him. Riley stood frozen, eyes wide, breathing shallow and fast. "Derek, stop," she whispered. "Please." But he wasn't listening. He twisted in the officer's grip, spitting venom in every direction. "She set me up. She hates me because I'm successful. She's always been jealous." I felt more than saw Riley flinch at that. Derek kept raging. Riley, tell them I didn't do anything, tell them. But Riley didn't speak. She moved. Slowly, like each step cost her more strength than she had. She reached into her jacket pocket, hands trembling, and pulled out a folded stack of papers. I recognized them instantly: financial documents, loan forms, threatening emails, the ones she had secretly forwarded or printed, the ones she had been too scared to show me. She stepped past Derek's thrashing form and faced the detective. I kept these, she whispered. I didn't know when I'd need them, but he made me sign things. He used my name. He used our parents' estate. I'm so sorry. Detective Harmon took the documents. Her eyes sharpened further as she skimmed. This, she said, is identity theft, fraud, and coercion. She nodded to the officers. Cuff him. Derek's scream cracked through the air. You're nothing without me, he shouted at Riley, voice hoarse, raw. You'll come crawling back. You don't have anything. Riley's voice came out barely louder than a breath. I was nothing with you. The officers snapped the cuffs tight. Metal clinked against his wedding band. Derek jerked, trying to twist free, but it didn't matter. The fight had drained from him. His face twisted into something primal, half fear, half rage, as they marched him toward the door. He looked over his shoulder, straight at me. This isn't over, Maya, he roared. You think you won? You don't know who you're messing with. Detective Harmon stepped into his path, calm as winter. It's over for today. The door slammed behind them. The sound echoed through the lakehouse, rattling picture frames and settling like dust into every corner. Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that fills your lungs after you've been underwater too long. Aunt Linda sobbed softly into her apron. Tom sank into a chair, rubbing his hands over his face. Jenna wrapped her arm around my shoulder, her breath shaking. Riley broke. She collapsed into me, grief and fear and relief pouring out in a rush of trembling breaths. I'm sorry, she choked. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should have listened. I didn't know how to leave him. I didn't know how to stop any of it. I held her, tight, for the first time in years, without resentment. Only sorrow, only love, only the promise that this time, finally, I would not let her drown alone. As I looked toward the window where Derek had stood laughing the night before, something inside me settled, hardened, shifted. This wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about reclaiming a life someone tried to steal. And for the first time since I'd opened my banking app that morning, I felt steady, clear, ready. In the days that followed, the lake house felt like a completely different place. Quieter, lighter, as if someone had opened every window and let something toxic blow out across the water. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full thick with aftershocks, unspoken apologies, and the strange weight of freedom. Detective Harmon came by twice more that weekend, gathering statements, collecting copies of the laptop logs, photographing the bruises on Riley's wrist. She moved with calm efficiency, but every so often she'd pause, studying a document or a timestamp, with a crease in her brow like she was piecing together a puzzle larger than any of us realized. On her last visit, just before driving back into town, she pulled me aside on the porch. The sun was setting over the lake, staining the water orange and gold. Maya, she said, I need you to prepare yourself. Derek didn't act alone. My pulse flickered. What do you mean? There are patterns? She said quietly. Transfers, encrypted messages, offshore accounts. He was tied to something bigger. We'll need your help as this unfolds. She gave me her card, tapped the corner of it. And be careful. People like him don't always go quietly. Something cold slid down my spine, but underneath it, something steadier rose. Resolve. Maybe even purpose. When Riley and I returned to Denver, she moved into my apartment temporarily. She baked at odd hours, cupcakes at midnight, muffins at dawn, filling the place with a warm vanilla fog that softened everything. Sometimes she'd cry without warning. Sometimes she'd apologize again and again. But slowly she began to breathe like someone no longer bracing for impact. Meanwhile, the boutique opened its doors again. Customers came back. Chloe hugged me so tightly I almost cried. The bank restored most of the stolen funds. Insurance covered what remained. For the first time since the lake house, I let myself exhale. A month later, I signed the lease for a second boutique location, something I'd only dreamed of before. I stood inside the empty space, sunlight pooling across the bare floors, and felt something inside me stitch back together. But that night, as I locked up my original shop, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Just 2 words. You're next. I stared at the message until the streetlights blurred. They thought they'd broken me. But all they'd done was hand me the weapon I needed. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, I want you to hear me now. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. Sometimes the people who share your blood can wound you deeper than anyone else ever could. And sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to walk straight into the fire and refuse to burn. I'm still picking up the pieces of what happened at that lake house, and I know the story isn't finished yet. So if any part of my journey hit something in you, subscribe. Stay with me. This story isn't over.